what I could tell from just looking at my children and hearing stories of like your children is that it's not healthy. It has to be guarded. We don't know the long-term impact of what does it mean to be healthy. What is the right amount of time to spend? Where should they be spending their time? I still think that there's a ton of benefit to just experiencing the real world. And there are physical and psychological benefits to come from that. So we should not forget that.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today is the founder and CEO of Sweatworks, a global fitness agency that provides digital solutions to a range of clients that include Nike, Bose, Spartan, Equinox, SoulCycle, Strava, and many more. Innovation sits at the heart of his brand and is the key ingredient that continues to fuel its success. In this week's episode, we discuss his 6-month project spent researching the Metaverse, blockchain, NFTs, and crypto as he aimed to understand how these concepts can be beneficial for Sweatworks and the fitness industry. We cover several topics, including Web 3.0 and what it means for your business, the significance of blockchain and what it means for the fitness industry, and finally, the Metaverse. What is it? Who is using it? And why should we be interested in it? So please welcome the CEO and founder of Sweatworks, Mr. Mo Iqbal. Well, Mo, thanks for joining us in Newport Beach.
Yeah.
This conversation came about when we were on a yacht in Miami, didn't
That's
it?
right. That's right.
And we were threatening to do a podcast for a long time, and you said, well, I've got a different idea for you. So tell me kind of, let's share the conversation then.
Yeah, I mean, I love how it came about. We were literally on a boat in Miami. I might have been consuming, I don't think you were. And I said, Matthew, I want to get on, but I want to come on with a different idea, with a good idea to help your audience, something that's taken me 7-9 months to understand. I want to distill it into 60 minutes, so let's see how that goes.
Fantastic. Well, I was also quite fascinated about the subject, which what would we call it? Because that was the other thing. When I started to research the topic that we briefly spoke about on the boat, there was so many different areas. So is there a word that kind of, one of the things that came out for me was almost like this Web 3.0, but is there something that defines kind of where things are going next in your world?
Yeah, so I think Web 3 captures it all. So maybe if we could take a minute to talk about what Web 1 and Web 2 are. That's the natural question. Web 1 I describe as having an open protocol. That's what the internet was built on. You hear terms like HTTP, SMTP for email. Email was the first super app that created Web 1. It allowed you to search and really kind of explore the web. Web 2 was the social networks in a closed protocol. So Web 1 is open, Web 2 is closed. That's apps like Facebook, WeChat, Instagram, really how you connect social communities together. Web 3 takes the best of Web 1, the open world, and the social aspects of Web 2 and brings that together in Web 3.
Okay, right. Yeah, I think I understand that then. So when we were at Ursa, there was a lot of talk and companies explaining that they were going into the Metaverse. So without going into a huge amount of detail, because I want to cover it in a little bit more specifics as we go through this, but how would you define the Metaverse? Because I know Facebook have done a clever job at sort of rebranding and kind of putting their stake on the word meta, but what would be, for someone who doesn't know, what's the Metaverse?
I think the best way to describe the Metaverse, and yeah, Facebook rebranded themselves into their new name, Meta. It's really a three-dimensional world, and I think Metaverse often is confused as being Web 3. Metaverse is a technology or a description of technologies that is a part of Web 3. It's really where you are living your avatar self in a virtual reality world where you can interact with other people, with other products, even buy things as well.
Right, okay. And then is there a connection, and if so, what, with the blockchain? We hear it a lot in crypto. I've tried to understand a little bit about it, but what is blockchain and how does that connect to like Web3 and the Metaverse, if at all?
Another great question. So let me take a step back to crypto and what crypto was. So if you think about crypto, the idea of crypto has been there for decades. Ever since the internet came, developers were kind of obsessed with this idea of digital currency, how to create a digital currency. The problem with digital currency, in at least how the developers thought about it, is that one, you can duplicate it. So in other words, if I gave you a digital coin or digital painting, I could copy it. So how do I know that the one I have is the real one? How can I prevent it from duplicating it? The second one was really, how do you create value for the currency? If I say, here's the digital dollar, well, what's there preventing you from copying that and making 1 million digital dollars, right? And the third one is it being anonymous. So in other words, if I spent a digital dollar online, you can easily track it and say, this is tied to Matthew, this is tied to Mohammed. In 2009, Satoshi created a paper. He published a paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer cash-based system. And what was revolutionary about it is that he solved for a lot of those problems. So the first problem is, how do you replicate one from being copied? How can you authenticate to know that it is the original? He did that through a concept called proof of work. And the third is making it anonymous as well.
And just on that, just a
Sure.
quick one on that authentication. What do you mean by authenticate it then? Just sort of explain that in a slightly different way.
That's the blockchain.
Okay.
So the authentication part is having the blockchain basically perform computing work, almost like an algorithm, to validate that, yes, this is you. Like that this artifact digitally that you've said is in fact what you say it is. It's not a copy. And you could track that by another miner going in there, looking at the work and saying, yes, here's the proof of work, here's the records, here's the ledger, almost like a checkbook ledger, to say this is valid and not a copy. That did not exist before. So what he described ended up being the blockchain. So crypto as a currency was the output of Satoshi's paper in 2009. But one of the best benefits of that, or outcomes of that, was the blockchain.
Okay. So just to go back a little bit then. So what is crypto then? When we say crypto, is that essentially different currencies, the electronic currencies, is it?
That's what it is.
Okay.
Crypto, as a term in terms of how it's used in our context today, is a digital coin.
Okay. And so the blockchain is a way of preventing people let's use a regular pound or dollar or euro or whatever, where you can people create fake money and they print it and they create these good forgeries. So what you're saying is, like, with digital money, it's also very easy to potentially copy and create fakes, which you don't want to do. So something called the blockchain was created to allow you to make sure that there's only one true original, so you know exactly that this is a genuine equivalent to a dollar, not a copy. Is that's
exactly it, Matthew. So that's exactly right. The physical currencies as we know today, we call fiat currencies. And crypto does that. So when it authenticates that it is valid, the other thing that it does to make it similar to a fiat currency is scarcity. So one of the things that Satoshi also said in his paper is, how do I create value? So he created value by saying that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be created. Just like currency in the US is tied to the economy, currencies around the world are typically tied to something, and that's how value is determined. In a digital currency, scarcity is what creates the value there.
Okay. And so when Bitcoin was created then, did he also create this blockchain simultaneously for the purpose of creating the currency, or did they go hand in hand?
They went hand in hand. Okay. So in other words, Bitcoin could not have existed without the blockchain.
Okay, and so now this thing called blockchain, and we can go into a bit more detail, but I'll call it a technology. The technology that was used for currency, they've realized can now be used for other things. Like the second thing which I was going to ask you about, is NFTs. So is that then? Is this sort of underlying technology allow you, whether you're a musician or an artist, now to create an original something? So it's not the fake, it's the original. Is that where the NFT comes in?
That's correct. So let's look at the concept. We just talked about how the blockchain creates value for digital currency. The blockchain can also create value and authenticate what's called an NFT, also called a non-fungible token. That could be a piece of digital art. It could be tied to an experience. It could be tied to something that you own. But the blockchain is the underlying technology behind NFTs.
Right. Okay. And so, what are smart contracts?
Right. So smart contracts are a part of the blockchain. Smart contracts is something that you write to validate something that is on the blockchain. So in other words, if you have a currency, there's a process called mining. And mining is this proof of work. It's part of the proof of work that happens, right? So proof of work is something that validates work that is being done, so you cannot replicate it. If that, and smart contracts are part of the proof of work process.
And what does, like, in for someone like me or anyone listening or in business, like what's by having these things that are in existence, what does this allow us to do that we probably weren't able to do before then, if you've got a smart contract?
Yeah, so I would the first thing I would say is that what the blockchain does in general is the ability to decentralize data. So when you think about the internet today, and when you're storing data, data is stored up in the cloud with institutions. So let's go back to, we talked about Facebook. Data in Facebook sits within the servers of Facebook. What the blockchain does is move that from central servers in Facebook to these decentralized blocks.
Introducing the next big thing in functional training, the Escape Barrow, a revolutionary training tool that combines a loaded farmer's carry with a sled push to develop hip, grip, and core strength. Developed in partnership with Pete Holman, inventor of the TRX Rip Trainer and Nautilus Glute Drive, the Escape Barrow can be rolled, pushed, dragged, and carried. The Escape Barrow packs a punch with an impressive load capacity of 440 pounds, and with a two-stage galvanized paint covering process, it's also ideal for outdoor use. So head over to escapefitness.com/barrow. That's escapefitness.com/barrow to find out more. Enjoy the rest of this episode.
Also create value and authenticate what's called an NFT, also called a non-fungible token. That could be a piece of digital art. It could be tied to an experience. It could be tied to something that you own. But the blockchain is the underlying technology behind NFTs.
Right. Okay. And so, what are smart contracts?
So smart contracts are a part of the blockchain.
So, as I was researching this, I was looking at these sort of DAOs, and everybody's talking about decentralized organizations or decentralized finance, and I guess
DeFi.
what DeFi, that was it, yeah, decentralized finance. So essentially, what it seems as though some of this technology does is it takes the power away from a few people or a few organizations, like you gave the example with Facebook, and it distributes the power to many people. Would that be a...
That's exactly it. That's the concept of Web3.
Okay. So in your mind then, I guess in some ways that's great. You know, if you look at finance and look at what's happening in the world at the moment, and certainly what we've all been through for the past few years is you know, centralizing that with certain people that you may or may not agree with may not be the best thing for people. It may not be in the long run. Whereas if it's decentralized, then I suppose, you know, you're a little bit more in control of your destiny. Do you think, as this seems to be the way that people are trying to go, certainly with technology, and that, you know, that's a thread between everything we do. Do you think there's sort of any risks at decentralizing certain things? Because I suppose there's a responsibility, if now we have all of that power as individuals, we also have to take some of that responsibility as well, because it's like, okay, well, if you're not giving it to someone, I use the example of when you're a kid and your parents, like your parents are probably centralizing and providing a certain amount of protection for you as an individual. If you take them away and you're a kid and you're sort of dealing with stuff that you don't really understand, is there a danger in your mind of sort of maybe that going wrong in any way?
I think so. I think there's a danger in both aspects of it. So again, going back to Satoshi's paper on crypto and Bitcoin with the blockchain, this idea of, he created this idea of the consensus protocol. And what that essentially means is that 51% of the people in this network need to be good actors. So you're making that assumption that 51% or the majority of consensus are going to be acting on good faith. If you go below that, then the system doesn't work and the system fails. So you've got to want to do that. And people are incentivized to be honest and do authentic work, because when you are a miner, you get rewarded by a piece of the blockchain. So you're getting rewarded for doing the right work. And the minute that you're not, you're kicked out and you lose all your value, and then your value goes back to the broader network. But in terms of trust, I've been thinking about this as today in the Web 2 world, we almost live in a surveillance state or a surveillance economy where most of the largest tech companies monetize off of your data. So you get to use platforms like Google and Facebook or WeChat, WhatsApp, Instagram, essentially for free, but they're really not free, right? They're monetizing and profiting off of your data. What Web3 does is that it flips it around. So instead of the platforms monetizing off of your data, you're now in control of it. And if you want them to use it, you have to give them permission and access to use your data. So that is the big shift between the current economy of today in technology and what the potential for Web3 is.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we spoke about on the boat, which was quite interesting. This shift of power from organisations to individuals, and I suppose at the moment we're all trading, and we're acknowledging it. Anytime you have a new upgrade on your phone or with Facebook, you're basically clicking to say, okay, we give you permission for that if you want to, if we want these features and benefits that you're going to give us. What I guess for certain people, and maybe even certain organisations who can navigate their way through this, it's like, look, I don't want, particularly if you're trying to compete with these companies, it's like, look, I want to opt out. I don't really want to be part of that. But for the average person on the street that, this is, and I would class myself probably in that category up until I decided to research this, most of us would be like, okay, well, I don't know anything about it, and I want to use those services, so I'm going to continue to give it away anyway. How do you sort of how as big a shift as this is? Do you think, like, where do you think this will go? Do you think people will just continue to give access to these individuals, because if they don't, they're going to lose a lot of the things that they were getting that they enjoyed, and they'll just sort of follow the crowd anyway? Or do you think you'll start to get like a big shift where people are like, okay, I'm going to start taking that, I'm going to empower myself to do that, and then a whole new ecosystem will develop?
Yeah, so first, I think in every 10 to 15 years, there is a leap in technology. So, going back to World War II, you might have had the mainframes, then you had computers, then you had microcomputers, then you had the internet, then mobile phones. This is that next shift of evolution, is the blockchain. And in each time that the shift happened, it took about a decade for consumers to adapt and evolve to understand it. And that is where we are today. So I think right now, especially coming out of the pandemic, I feel like people are more in tune with how data works, right? Because they've seen technology become a bigger part of their daily lives, right? Whether it is on their mobile phones, whether how they're engaging with communities. And I think because of some of the leaks and breaches that have happened, consumers understand and say, wow, like my phone, your iPhone today sends over 1,000 data points outwards on you to companies that you might not even know that they're sending, your information to. So as they're becoming more aware of that, that's raised awareness. So I think people are.
Do you think people really know? Like I would class myself as, from what I understand from marketing, get to see a lot of that stuff. And even recently, when people tell me in the know that this is what's happening, I'm like, no, this is just like a kind of, what do they call them? Like these conspiracy theories. You almost like play it down to that. But do you think the average person really understands what is going on with this?
I don't think so. I think, in fact, even me, I'm a technologist. I run a technology company, and until I actually looked at and tracked how many data points are going off of my iPhone, I had no idea. So I don't think the average person does. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that, right? So one, I want to state that it's not like these large tech companies have malicious intent. I think most of them are acting out of providing a good product, trying to find a way to give you a good product and monetize off it. They have to be profitable, right? They have to do that. But at the same time, I don't think they're being as open and honest with what kind of data they're accessing from you and what they're doing with that data. It's not just all to serve you better ads, give you better shows. They're using the data to do deep analysis and deep learning that might not always turn out for the best results.
And I can't help thinking that these companies are run by people like us. They're not sort of super beings. They've grown so quickly. and they seem to have been able, through technology, to accumulate so much power that you have to question, do some of these divisions and departments kind of lose a little bit of a track, and you get quite excited about it, and suddenly we're here now, and it's like, which I think what happened about a year ago with the big social media companies being brought in front of the government in the US, where they suddenly, and it was kept, I feel it was kept quite quiet, but something happened where they put their, the government got to grips with these big tech companies, and they put a stop to a lot of it, because you're starting to see, you can no longer do a lot of the things that you could do with advertising and all that kind of stuff. So I can't help thinking that it accelerated to such a speed, and I think everybody got quite worried in terms of where it was going.
I think technology in general, at least in the last 4 decades, has usually been ahead of government regulations and policies, but they've tended to catch up. So when you look at autonomous driving, you look at technology companies like you talked about, you even looked at recently, we're talking about Web3, but crypto, and the crash that crypto's had. Crypto has a lot of self rules within it, but it's clear that without true regulation, you need something to have guardrails even for cryptocurrency. So yes, government and consumers are starting to get caught up in terms of how they're using data and what they're doing with it. It's happening. Okay,
that was a bit of a sort of a side one, but I did want to touch that decentralized thing. So coming back to I guess stuff that's more relative to our audience probably. So the Metaverse, I've seen, going back to Ursula again, seeing quite a few companies doing things in that area, developing products and brands within it. And I got to speak to a few people, and I certainly, as recently as a few weeks ago, started to get my head around what that was. But in your mind, how many metaverses are there? Because I thought there was one, but apparently there's not. There's quite a lot. How many are there? How do you find them? And then who owns all these different metaverses?
There's more than one metaverse. The one you might be talking about is the sandbox.
Okay.
Maybe is one that is potentially pretty popular. Just like there's more than one crypto, right? There's multiple cryptocurrencies. So there's really no limit to how many metaverses you could potentially create. There's no limit to how many cryptocurrencies you potentially could want to create. The value within the metaverse or within a cryptocurrency is around the offering that has. So for instance, on the metaverses, what are the levers that's going to create scarcity? You're buying real estate in the sandbox. What does it mean? Why is it valuable? How are you valuing it? Really no different than, think about real estate in the physical world. You could buy a 10 by 10 plot of land anywhere in America, and the value is going to range from 0 to maybe $500,000 or $1 million. So it really depends on where it is and what the value that's bringing for you. The metaverse is the same way. So you have multiple metaverses. And I think over time, you might have specific metaverses that are created. Maybe one for entertainment, maybe one for fitness, maybe one for fashion. And people are going to invest in technologies to serve that audience better.
Okay, so would it be, so say for example, I'm like, come on Mo, let's develop a metaverse. Would it be similar to if we were a developer and we're like, okay, there's a plot of land just outside of Los Angeles, there's nothing going on. Let's put a cinema and we'll put a gym and we'll put some shopping and everything. Is it the same way? Whereas if you want to create one, you'll kind of build some stuff and you'll hopefully get people to come and build that around an investor. Is that sort of a similar?
That's exactly it. You've got to build the underlying infrastructure, in this case built on top of the blockchain. And what kind of services or piping, I'm using again the physical sense, so you can have running water, or you can have electricity, or you can have high-speed internet. Those same services and infrastructure is what that metaverse would need.
Okay, so I saw that there was, one of the people I came up with, there's like Snoop World and Playboy have got the Playboy Meta Mansion that they're building. So why would they be outside of a brand play? Like, is there any incentive if they sort of build something? Because apparently the guy next door to Snoop paid $450,000 to have a plot of land next to him. So who is he? Is he paying Snoop because Snoop owns the whole metaverse and that's on his, and then Snoop makes some money from that? How does that work? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know Snoop World in particular, but what I will say is there is, just like a plot of land in the metaverse, there is a significant amount of investment that goes into, one, creating the infrastructure for that metaverse and creating value. So you might invest money in developing the blockchain that's needed for there and all the associated services, just like you're building an app with an API, right? That's the same in the metaverse. Now, as more and more people want access to it, maybe company A goes in there. In this case, it's Snoop, and the land right next to him becomes more valuable. It makes the entire metaverse more valuable. So value, in that sense, is really no different than physical property. Okay. If you buy a plot of land, the value of that land is going to be dependent upon who's living there, what services they provide, the school system, the restaurants, and things like that. It's very similar in the metaverse.
Now, the only bit that is different, I guess, is why would, so let's say Snoop's got this metaverse and then some people now moving in, neighbors around there. Why would I want to, well, one, I suppose, why would I want to own something there? And then two, like, who's going to come and visit, like, why would you go and, would you just sort of like hang out and see what is going on? Like, how do you kind of bring the real world into one of these metaverses? What's the motivation to to put on some goggles or whatever and see what's happening?
Well, I think the first distinction is you don't need the Oculus or goggles to go to the metaverse, right? So you could still enter the metaverse through an app on your phone. I think that's the first distinction that needs to be made. But the second one is it's very, very early today. It's almost like when Jeff Bezos opened up the first Amazon e-commerce store to sell books. Who's going to come? There's a lot of other factors that are going to be determined by that, but I think the plan is build something that is compelling, offer value, experiences, shared experiences, a community where you could do things that you might not be able to do in the physical world, in the metaverse, and people will join you there.
Okay, because I've seen one of the things that they're doing now is actually putting on concerts, which I suppose that seems as though it really fits because, you can be sitting at home and you can have friends joining you and you can have, I can't remember who one of the popular musicians had done one recently, and it looked like quite a cool experience. You could be sitting at home and
I think that's the value. I think the metaverse is an opportunity to make experiences more accessible that you otherwise would not be able to see. It could reach a broader audience. You have a chance to experience something, share it with someone who might be across the world.
Yeah,
that's pretty tough to do. And then to go a step further, own a piece of that experience through an NFT.
Right.
Which is something you cannot do in the physical world.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to come on to next. And just before I sort of finish off on this metaverse thing, for me it was a little bit strange, and I kind of limit my son. So my son's into Oculus and he's 10, and I put it on, I get impressed, but I'm sort of more of a real life person, and I have to limit the time he spends in there. And he's got friends in there and all kinds of stuff. I don't know what he's got going on in there. But I suppose the shift I seem to not totally appreciate is how a lot of his life and the time is actually spent in front of a screen. My daughter, it's TikTok and things like that. And I suppose even with us adults and even my grandmother, it's Facebook. And I suppose she's accessing it, like you said earlier, she's just accessing it through a phone and iPad. So I suppose in some ways, even though we don't necessarily think we are, we're accessing this. It's probably not a great experience compared to my son's, but we are probably living in another universe a lot more than what we actually appreciate.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that, and I think this next generation coming up is growing up with a different type of community and physical experience than we're used to. And I think the metaverse is building a future for that world, and crypto's a part of it. So for example, you think about how do you spend value in the metaverse? Well, with crypto, right? Crypto is the perfect currency for the new world. It's infinitely divisible. Like, I think this idea of I have a cent and then 5 cents and 10 cents and $1 and $5, that concept doesn't exist in the crypto world because you could have something for 1.1. Right? So it's infinitely divisible, and it makes it easy to spend and exchange value. So a lot of the technologies that are built in the metaverse, built on top of the blockchain, is really built for like your son and their future, where they're growing up in a world where they're interacting, learning, and engaging in a different dimension than what we're used to today.
So with NFTs then, and with, again, coming back to my son, like he's always wanted to buy this stuff for cars and these new colors and these special wheels and all that
In the
sort of
metaverse.
stuff. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
in Oculus and things like that. So what would he be like at the moment? It's coming off my credit card, but if and I believe there's a lot of other things that you can buy in there. So if you buy stuff in, at the moment you can buy it in regular currency through your card. But are you saying that there are, if you have like a wallet and some crypto, you would actually sort of start buying some of this in crypto? Is that another way you could
we
trade?
kind of talked about this idea of decentralized finance. If you think about the financial system today, it's a little bit archaic. When you pay with your credit card, even when you're paying with your credit card in the metaverse, it has to go back to American Express, then it goes to a clearinghouse, and then eventually you make a payment, to a bank. It's this whole process. The metaverse is instant. So it doesn't go through all of these clearinghouses. There's no fees, right? There's no underlying infrastructure aside from the blockchain. So yeah, I mean, I think in the future, you'll be able to pay for things in the metaverse directly with crypto. Now, when your son buys something like the wheels for his car, if there's only 100 of them that are produced, which you can verify through the blockchain, and if that becomes a scarce and wanted item, the value of that wheel goes up. So he might have paid, zero point 0.1 Ethereum for something today, and then a year from now, it's worth 0.5. Similar to you and I growing up with trading cards, right? Where trading cards, a rookie card of an all-star player goes up in value. This is the modern day equivalent of that.
And I heard one of the most popular things in the metaverse is these, I don't know what the name of it, but these trading sites where you buy like some shoes or whatever and you trade it with other people. Have you?
Like OpenSea.
That was it, yeah. OpenSea, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that.
What is that?
I mean, essentially that is a trading platform for NFTs and digital assets that are backed by the blockchain. So you might have a piece of art, you might have an experience, you might have something of value, and you could trade it if you need something else, right? So it is it's a marketplace for trading NFTs.
Right. So NFTs are these sort of original pieces of digital something. Where do you, if you buy one, I understand there's like special place to store them. So how do you, if I say for example I brought a Supreme sort of ski suit or some Gucci sunglasses or whatever for my avatar, where do I keep that so that I don't lose it?
Good question. So there are places to keep that. So Coinbase, you might have heard of a company called Coinbase. Coinbase is a great way to buy and exchange currencies. There's other applications called Ledger. Ledger is an actual physical good, which you might have heard of, as another way to store it, and they can kind of keep that locked away for you, keep it safe, keep it secure. But that's how you would own items that are in the blockchain, is you would be able to have these applications that are going to store your value and you can access it. And you could also see that value go up. So let's just say you store something in one of these sites, you'll be able to say, hey, I bought this for X and now it's worth Y.
Okay. And a couple of things that seem to have moved very, very quickly is fashion. So, there's Gucci and a number of other brands on there. Do you think that there's also cars that seem to, you can get like digital versions of cars. I saw McLaren and Lamborghini and people like that. So are there any, do you think in terms of coming back to sort of traditional business, are there any things that you think work particularly well from NFTs? Because I suppose what you're outside of the art side, which I think is slightly different, are you mainly creating things around your digital avatar? So is that so how you look and what you drive and maybe the house? Are those sort of some of the popular things that are starting in this type of space where you're buying stuff in this metaverse?
Yes, absolutely. So I think we might have talked about this on the boat as well, but luxury goods, luxury items, Louis Vuitton, Hermes, Chanel. When you look at the Birkin bag as an example, why is it so valuable, right? A part of it is because it's handcrafted and there's craftsmanship and time that goes into it. But the other part of it is that it's scarce, that Hermes will only make so much of this bag. You look at luxury watches, same thing, right? That's a controlled product. The output of it, and they've created scarcity out of it. The metaverse is the same as well. So when you look at your avatar and you want to buy that Supreme, shirt, or you want to buy a luxury good, or you want to get the car, there's only limited quantities of it. And what makes the metaverse unique is if you think about buying the digital McLaren before Web3, someone can copy it. There's really no value there. But when you get it in the metaverse, through the blockchain, you could limit to say there's going to be exactly 5 of these made, and that's it. So that will increase the value of that product over time.
I was reading some. It was on Forbes actually, and there was a lady that said that between, and they said this could be optimistic, but between 5 and 15% of your wardrobe one day could be a digital wardrobe.
That's incredible. I did not read that, but that would not surprise me.
And there was somewhere where it was. I've got it written here. The sort of value of the fashion. I'll put it up in a minute. But there was like I didn't realize like how quickly. I've got it on this NFT somewhere. How quickly the amount of money that people were spending on this whole. Oh yeah, that was it. So. Yeah, I thought I wrote it down, but it was oh, here we go. Yeah, NFT. So this was so NFTs in 2020. It was about $100 million business. In 2021, 22 billion.
Wow.
And they reckon that by 2030 it'll be worth 240 billion. And I think the fashion component of that was pretty significant. You know, it was in the billions. So. It just the jump from like 2020, which is 100 million, to 2021, which is actual numbers. Like it's a $22 billion industry,
it's a significant industry. Significant.
Which is crazy. Like how much people are paying for these digital versions of themselves. But then when I started to think about it, like if that was incorporated into something like Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you know, the amount of money that people pay for status on there and how they look, I could then kind of understand, well, you know, if you could afford to build your page and, you know, have something that no one else has, or a unique page, or one of 50, I could see why people would start to pay for something.
And I mean, and this is just this is just the start of, like I said, I still think we're a good 5-10 years away from mass adoption of Web3, but it is coming, and the flywheel has already started.
Yeah. The other thing that I was reading about is it's interoperable, which I believe it means that it kind of crosses different types of platforms. Now, when I started to look at the big players in the market, so you obviously got Microsoft, which I didn't realize how big they were. You know, they've got. I didn't know too much about games, but apparently they own Minecraft, which is one of the biggest games. And then Microsoft versus Meta, which is Facebook, who in the gaming world, they're known for Farmville, which apparently isn't anywhere near the sort of same kind of quality. So you've got these two big players, which is Microsoft and Facebook. And then the other sort of third player is Apple, which seems to have taken a slightly different approach, which we can come on to. But how then, you know, in your view, if, say, for example, you buy a $1,000 pair of Gucci shoes and you're in the sort of Microsoft Minecraft world, can you transfer this across all these different platforms, or do you see it that it's still going to be relatively siloed, so that, okay, well, you're either in this group or this group, and like your Android or your Apple? What's your thoughts on that?
So Minecraft itself and Farmville aren't actually built on top of the blockchain, even though they're part of the metaverse. So we'll view them as part of the Web3 family, but those particular products are not built on top of the blockchain.
Okay,
so
what does that mean then?
It's a little different. So I think when you're looking at NFTs in particular that are created on top of the blockchain, they have inherent value that could be transferred, right? So they're not tied within a walled garden. Those games, if you buy, and I'm not a player of Minecraft or Farmville, but if you buy a product and upgrade within that, there's really no value on something that you buy in Minecraft that you can take over to Farmville.
Okay.
But if you're in the metaverse, in the actual metaverse, and let's say you want to take your Gucci bag from Metaverse A to Metaverse B, you could do that, and its value gets transferred with you, at least.
I'm with you.
Right. Now, the value of that Gucci bag might be worth differently in Metaverse A than Metaverse B.
Okay.
Right, where maybe other things are more valued, but at least there is a value, and you could that's what the interoperation of the metaverse means, is that the Web3 is very much of an open world. Web2, like even if you had, let's say, all of your profile on Facebook, you can't just transfer it over into another into like LinkedIn, right? You have to exist independent of each other.
Okay.
In the metaverse or with the blockchain, you could have your single profile that's carried across multiple applications.
Okay, that's interesting. So, all right, so the metaverse is different to what you would have, or what Microsoft and some of these gaming companies are building. So do you see then with gaming, which also seems to be driving a lot of these ideas and innovations, do you see that will sort of integrate into what's happening in the metaverse and the blockchain? Because you're kind of buying stuff in a lot of this. Some people are spending a fortune in these, from what I've read about. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen, but I think traditional tech companies have to go through a massive shift to fully live in the Web3 world. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The first thing is I talked about this idea of the surveillance economy that these technology companies are built on top of. That still exists today. So they have to kind of shift that. I think the second part too is how they manage and store data, right? So today they're storing data within their own systems, and in the Web3 world, the user, you would own that activity and you would own that data. So it is going to happen. They are going to make that shift.
Do you think they will, or do you think they're going to come sort of like, do you think they will because they're going to be forced to, or do you think, like, I suppose that's their, in some ways, that's their, that's their unique advantage, is that data that they have.
Absolutely. So even if you look at recent happenings like the overturning of Roe as an example of Roe v. Wade, the abortion, the abortion piece, right? So even if you look at that as an example, on one hand, you had a lot of these technology companies virtue signaling and saying, hey, we're going to pay to transport employees that are maybe in states that don't have access. At the same time, they're also contributing to anti-privacy measures, right? At the same time, those same tech companies are also contributing to anti-privacy measures. So if you think about that for a minute, today there's really not a lot of protection for consumers where they might be tracked. Like if they're prosecuted or an agency needs to get more information on them, they will give that, whether it's your cell phone data, whether it is your tracking data, whatever that is. In the Web3 world, that because it's decentralized, organizations won't be able to do that anymore. So I think they're stuck in these two worlds where one, they are virtue signaling and saying, hey, yes, we want to protect your rights. We want to protect your privacy. But then on the other hand, the way that their technology is built is actually against that.
Would you compare it, and I don't know, but I'm kind of sort of thinking that it could be as big as, when the internet came along, you had, that's how when I started my business, it was all fax machines. We didn't have a website, we didn't have email. And then the
You're
web,
aging yourself.
I know. And the internet came along and it just took out, like Amazon was the best example, it just destroyed all traditional bookshops and high street and everything now it has. So when you sort of explain this to me about the metaverse and how it's almost like inevitable that's where people will live, and then you have these companies now that kind of dominate your Facebooks and maybe Apple's, and they've got slightly different business model, but definitely Facebook's. Could you, I suppose, imagine a day where this metaverse is like, well, it's going to happen, and there could be, Facebook could just, if they don't figure out how to move and monetize that new industry, and maybe that's why he did it, that they could just totally disappear as quickly as they arrived?
I think so. I don't know if it's going to happen to Facebook. I don't have a glass to look forward and say, yeah, but if you look at examples that have happened over time, when industries shifted, there's some iconic brands. Let's go back to streaming. Look at Blockbuster, right? We always go to Blockbuster, rent videos, VHSs, then DVDs, and then Netflix came along. And Blockbuster never saw the change happening. When you look at even smartphones, BlackBerry, Nokia's going before BlackBerry. Nokia is another good example. You look at BlackBerry and then what Apple and the iPhone kind of did to that. So it's hard to look into the future and say which companies are going to make it, but they are certainly aware, and they have to figure out and realize, and I think they do recognize there is a reckoning that the current business model and how they've been working so far is not going to work in this new world anymore, because one, true consumer rights is where you really own your data and you own that access. And today we're relying upon government regulations, like and and legislation like GDPR or CCPA to help kind of protect us in a sense, right? But really the data is still with these institutions. Web3 flips that around, and I think they are going to be working to make that change happen. And I'm optimistic that most of them will.
Yeah. So the big shift really, and the takeaway for me from this Web3 is that the data, the power of the data is going away from big companies, institutions, and it's going back to the individual. That Web3 train, would you say, is that kind of an inevitable direction that, whether it's 2 years or 5 years, that there's not a lot that's likely to stop that from happening, would you say?
The train is already happening. So I look at inflection points in technology. Maybe a recent one that a lot of people can relate to are even apps like Instagram that came out in 2009. Instagram really took off when the iPhone, the same year with the iPhone 4. What happened with the iPhone 4 is the first iPhone to have an HD camera. And that was the flywheel that had Instagram just take off, because now you've got this nearly professional grade product in the palm of your hands. You've got an application to capture moments and share those moments. I think that is where we are today with the blockchain and Web3s. We have the infrastructure that's in place. We've got the app developers that are now creating applications. It's open source. It is right for our time and where we live in today. So I do see that this is a convergence of technologies that have happened, and it is going to define the internet of the future.
Right. What's your thoughts on the difference between? Well, you mentioned it with Oculus, and you said you don't have to put on an Oculus, and I believe that the sort of Oculus is owned by Facebook or Meta, and that's VR, and then Apple seems to be putting all their investment and their acquisitions into AR, I believe. What do you think about pros and cons of those two? Because again, it seems as though you've got these two giants that are really battling it out for which one works. Like from what I know about what Apple are doing and reading some of the acquisitions, it seems as though, whether it's glasses or the phone, I didn't realize what was in, it's not in my one, but what's in a lot of these phones now in terms of this AR and how that you can actually enter a different universe just even through using something like this. So I suppose in terms of I couldn't see myself walking around with an Oculus headset on too often, but I could see myself walking around with variations of phones and being able to kind of point it and look, and apparently all that technology already exists even on a basic level to map rooms and to view things that only you can view if you've got access to it and see things and everything like that. So where do you, one, maybe explain just on a basic level the difference between those two, and then two, kind of what do you think in terms of winning the race is gonna sort of lead that race?
Yeah, so great question. And I agree, the two get confused and interused all the time, but they mean different things. Virtual reality is VR. Virtual reality is taking a tour. I mean, I guess we're here about fitness as well, right? It's getting on a bike and riding in New Zealand on your bike and taking a virtual reality ride away from your own reality, right? That's virtual reality. And you can experience that through a screen, you can experience that through an Oculus. There's a lot of ways to experience virtual reality. Augmented reality, that's AR. That is changing the space that you live in. A good example recently, like if you just purchased a home or you want to put a couch in your office, you might have seen an app like Crate and Barrel that allows you to place that couch within your office using one of the new phones. That is augmented reality. And I think they both have use cases here. What Apple has, at least is hinting towards releasing in 2023, is their Oculus-like competitor, an actual virtual reality-based headset, and their own spin on Web3. But that's the difference between the two.
And do you think they both exist together, or do you think they'll end up being one that will become something that we all just get used to, and we've got these cool glasses? Because I kind of see it almost like when you're in your car and you've got some of these like heads up displays where you can you're looking at the real life, but you can kind of see stuff that's going on, and
for me, that kind of seems almost like a reality that you could quite easily live in, you know.
I think
and
they
you could
do
look at a
coexist.
person and it could almost tell you, if you want, could sort of tell you stuff about, you know.
As you're looking at them, right? Their background, their credit history. I do see them coming together. The Metaverse does, in fact, bring both of those worlds together, virtual reality and augmented reality. But I do see them coming together, but also applications developed for them independently as well.
All right. With being in the fitness space and mental health and physical health are really a big thing, and that's one of the reasons I guess I'm very concerned about my children spending too much time on this. And I know there's quite a famous story of Steve Jobs not letting his kids near any of this sort of stuff. I think Bill Gates is probably similar. So there's definitely a lot of dangers in using this stuff, and I guess now with and we'll come on to what it means for the fitness industry, but now we're kind of almost being encouraged to live more and more of our lives through these devices and VR and AR, and I definitely notice when my children have been doing this for a while, there's a big personality shift. You know, depending on what they watch, I can tell if they've been on it. If I come in the house, even if they tell me they've not been on it, I can tell the state of mind through what they've been doing, and I know how easy I can get hooked, thinking, what am I doing here? And I believe that you're getting these dopamine hits through the technology, which probably isn't a great thing for that to happen. Where do you stand on this technology in terms of mental health and releasing chemicals into your brain that might not be good at a young age?
Fundamentally, I'm a big fan of the outdoors. I need to get my daily dose of outdoor activity. I like to sweat outside. I like to experience the outside. I like to experience people in real life. And I think our brain is also evolving with the shift in technology. So our mind, so I don't think we're there yet. I think it's going to take us hundreds of years to kind of maybe get to this new world and get used to it. But in the meantime, it needs to be managed, just like anything else. My personal belief is anything in excess that isn't done in moderation is probably not good for you.
Yeah, I know in China I've heard that it's like a shop when opening hours. The internet's only open for certain hours. I don't know if you've heard that, but
that's in China.
Yes,
I have not heard that.
Okay,
with even internet cafes.
I mean like kids' access to internet. So I've heard that it's like it's limited within. We'll have to check it, but I've heard it's limited within so many hours a day. So you can't 24-hour sort of binge out on watching stuff.
That's really interesting. When you look at you talked about the tech companies going to Congress last year. A lot of that topic was really around children and the effect that these applications have on children. I don't think the truth is really out yet because a lot of the true data is, again, within the guarded walls of these technology companies yet. But what I could tell from just looking at my children and hearing stories of like your children is that it's not healthy. It has to be guarded. We don't know the long-term impact of what does it mean to be healthy? What is the right amount of time to spend? Where should they be spending their time? I still think that there's a ton of benefit to just experiencing the real world. And there are physical and psychological benefits to come from that. So we should not forget that.
Yeah. Coming on to the health industry then and fitness, which is kind of where this is all, I suppose, coming together really. What do you think are the opportunities for the health and wellness space? One of the things that I'll sort of kick it off. Like years ago, there was the Pokemon Go, which everybody had. Yeah. It was a huge success. And in some ways, I thought that was actually pretty cool. And it seemed as though that they really started something that got people moving. It did allow you to interact with this, but it didn't necessarily, although it did consume our lives for a little while actually, but it seemed as though it was a little bit safer and you were out and moving, and it almost seemed as though that whole development had kind of stopped because there's not really been anything like that since that happened, and there's not been anything that's sort of evolved, and why? But yeah, it was definitely a success for whatever reason. What do you think happened with that? And do you think there could still be other things that could be related to fitness that picks up on some of what was developed with that product?
Yes, I think like anything else, right? There's this initial excitement, and I think when there's new technology, I mean, in fact, even talking about earning NFTs and coins, there are companies today in the fitness world that say if you do activity, you learn certain kind of coins in this pay for play type of system. I think Pokemon Go is a great way to showcase an application, showcase what could be done, but probably did not have a lot of staying power. I mean, for a lot of reasons, you were potentially running into things. It might have been a health risk. Maybe people didn't want you to walk in certain places at certain hours. But at least what it did is that it showcased the possibility of something. And I think we are finding applications come out today that might have leveraged some of the learnings of a Pokemon Go.
Right. And with, because there was a couple of companies when I was looking at before this, I saw that they seem to have made some quite good progress. There was one which was called, there's Tribe that I think we interviewed Kevin actually at Ursa, and he's made a step into the metaverse. And I kind of asked him, well, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And he explained that that's where people are spending their time, and I could understand it from a branding perspective. There's a company called Global Fit Club, and then there was another one called Genopets, which again, kind of seemed to be where you sort of get rewarded for doing certain types of activities. But as a whole, what should we, and this is, I guess, really in the heart of what you do, but whether you're a manufacturer or whether you're an operator or individual trainers or whatever, where should we be thinking about potentially playing or exploring about playing? Because it's definite, as you said, that this is going to happen, and we've got to figure out, what that means to all of us. But are there any sort of obvious standout places where us as sort of traditional business owners could be getting involved, but without necessarily it becoming a distraction? Because at the moment, most of us are still trying to sort of recover, and we probably don't have a huge amount of money to put into R&D just for the sake of it. So how do you do something that's probably going to be meaningful, but also probably allows you to sort of move forward?
I think that's a journey that I started on last year. I mean, you and I kind of talked about this. I'm a technologist. I run a technology company, and I didn't understand Web3 and the metaverse. So I went on this 7-month journey of exploration, really going in deep to understand, is there a true application here for health and fitness? And we kind of talked about the Oculus and the metaverse there, but even doing gaming apps is, again, it's fun, it's engaging, but it's not going to lead to long-term health and wellness. So I think right now, one, understanding the existence of it and the application is going to be important. And to me, in terms of what we do and the industry that we're in, it really comes down to data and how data is managed. And the fundamental difference to understand between today's world and tomorrow's world is data gets stored by institutions, and then they are able to do research around that. And in tomorrow's world, data is going to be stored and owned by the consumer, by the user. Why is that good? When you look at how companies are going to do research, so let me use an example of Nike. Nike today has an app called Nike Run Club, fantastic app, beautiful design. But the primary purpose of an app like Nike Run Club is to learn from your activity and then give you recommendations. Nike then takes that data, does marketing on it, and maybe retargets you with the right kind of shoe to get. In tomorrow's world, you might still use an app like Nike Run Club, but the data gets stored in your blockchain, right? And then if Nike wants access to it, they'll have to potentially pay you to get access to it. And here's the other big benefit of it. Let's say you have another company that wants to do a big study on running. Today, the best way to do that is to maybe have you fill out a survey in today's world. In tomorrow's world, they can send out an email to all the runners and say, if you give me access to your blockchain, I will compensate you for your data, right? So right now, all the data will exist within Runkeeper or Strava or Apple, and they get to benefit on that data. They get to monetize that data. So when it comes to fitness, I think we have to be thinking about, there are some obvious applications. So for example, as a gym, Equinox started accepting crypto as a form of payment, right? So maybe when you're thinking about more macro level, I would say how you're exchanging value, something like crypto, right? Might be something from a payment perspective. But really, for health and wellness, it's how we store and access data is, I think, what the industry should be aware of.
And that's an interesting one, because I guess at the moment, there's probably two ways of looking at this. At the moment, there's probably a very small window of opportunity to maximize any data you've got to benefit your business. And on the other side, it's like, okay, look, be aware that in not too long that you're not going to be able to do that without paying for it.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to be as readily available. So don't build your business model on, which we spoke about even before we started this interview, like kind of, where to go and what to build. And it's like, if you're going to make a major investment in technology, then it shouldn't be based on sort of taking data and making recommendations about people unless you're putting in a budget to fund that.
Yeah, I mean, building technology is expensive, and I think right now, if you are a small business owner or you're a small operator, the best advice I can give is partner with good companies and good platforms that are already invested in the space, instead of trying to figure it out on your own. Right. So that to me is the best approach you can get, and partner with companies that are looking ahead for you.
With companies, I've used Strava, but companies like Strava, so I'm not sort of alienating anyone that you may be working with, but I suppose a lot of these companies that are building have historically been very successful at building their companies on that sort of stuff. What are they, if anything, do they realize that, look, this is coming and they're starting to kind of build in an evolution to what they're doing, or how do you see this without people that you don't work with, but are they just oblivious to it and they're at some point it's probably going to hit them head on before it's too late to change?
That's a really good question, and I think most companies right now don't understand it. Just being completely honest, I think most executives, most people in leadership, I put myself in that category. It took me 7 months of deep diving into the space to fully grasp the value of it and the power of it and the influence that it's going to have. I don't think most companies realize it today. What I could see happening is really regulation, ultimately driving the move towards this. So and you see it happening right now, right? Apple, for instance, over the last 18 months has really cut back on the ability to track. Well, that's changed the business model of a lot of people that acquire consumers by looking at your data. That is only going in the direction of more and more privacy, where they'll be able to track less and less of you. That's going to force the shift towards Web3, where now someone might say, great, you could, if you want to store all your tracking data, I don't know who would want to do that, but on the blockchain you can. And if you want to give access to Google, then you could do that, and then maybe you get Google for free.
I think Apple was quite smart, or whether they were smart, or I'm sure they're smart because they're very smart, but they seem to make this big marketing play on, they were the first ones to go out there and sort of like, almost like call it out for what it was. Okay, we're going to protect you. Now, I suppose as a company, probably historically, they also used all your data, didn't they? And
that's the ironic part, is that it's good business to have that, but in reality, they're also using your data as well at the same time, just in a different way. They're not retargeting you with ads, but they're absolutely tracking your usage of your phone. And you've seen prosecutors, go to Apple and say, hey, I need to know what's on this person's phone. So they're still storing it. So I think even companies like Apple have to look at, and they are looking at Web3 and the blockchain and how to evolve into this new world.
Sweatworks then, what? And again, this is something that we chatted about earlier, and your job really, I guess, I would say you're the leader in the fitness industry. I think you do a great job, and you've got some great innovations and clients that you work with. But your job is really to be able to come to people like myself and other large companies and tell them what's going to happen in the future. So what will the internet look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And outside of what we've spoke about, what will be some sort of significant changes that you think are going to be here that we need to be aware of that will probably change the way all of us run our businesses at the moment?
I think in the next 5 years, the internet's going to be very similar to what you have today, right? There'll be evolutions in processing and technology and experiences and all of that. But I think in the next 10 years, it's going to look very different. And a lot of it is based around how you run your business. How do you capture what you know about your consumer? I do think this is a win for a consumer. I do think it is a win for the business, because in 10 years, I could definitely see a world where you might have a customer coming to Escape who might have just finished a workout on a Star Trek treadmill. And all of a sudden you're able to say, great, just share with me what you just did, and I'm going to recommend you how you could cool down or do some functional workout with our product. But before, in today's internet, that correlation is very hard, because unless you have that consumer's login within the Escape brand, you're not going to get it from Star Trek or from an operator. But in 10 years from now, you'll be able to do that very easily. So I think this is a win for operators and brands like yourself, and also for the consumer, because the consumer can essentially walk around with their data. And today the data sits behind a closed wall.
Yeah.
Today we need APIs to integrate. You might have heard the term APIs, right? Everyone talks about APIs. APIs and the concept of APIs doesn't really exist in Web3. APIs were something that we needed for Web 2 and Web 1, but not in Web 3. So in Web 3, it makes this interoperation between brands much easier than the current web today.
I've been in quite a few industry panels and where they've been talking about, well, do the suppliers of the equipment own the data, and or do we own the data as the operator, and it should be our data because they're our customers, and then it's like, no, they're our data because they're on their machines. And there's been these constant debates I don't think are ever resolved. And you have some brands that are very open, which have these, I believe, these APIs, and then some that have their closed system. So are you saying then that really the future of whatever it is look, whether you're an operator, trainer, manufacturer, content provider, that none of you are going to really have that. It's just going to be the people that use it. And
that's correct.
Okay,
that's
a big
really
shift.
It's a huge shift. and if you think about this, right, you ultimately will create a value. So your data will become an NFT. So let's say somebody wants to do research, they might say, hey, Matthew, I know you've been doing functional fitness for 30 years. That's valuable to me. I'd love to know what your activity looked like there. They might compensate you for that. So that's the big shift that's going to happen. You're right. It's not the equipment manufacturer and it's not the operator. The data is really owned by the consumer.
Interesting. How are you thinking about your own business then? How do you make some of the decisions about where because you got what, 200 people in your organization. You've obviously got to, particularly in this world, you've got to choose about where you direct your resources and who you partner with and how you decide where to go further. And I guess this is an interesting area, I would say. But how are you thinking about where you take your business over that similar period?
Yeah, I feel like in our history, we've always done a pretty decent job of understanding where technology is going and helping bring our brands over there. So I really view from a business perspective, us, one, enabling brands, like commercial brands, to take their data and store it in the blockchain. And on the other hand, helping operators get access to it. So it's really twofold. And I would say a third one is educating the consumer. I mean, we always feel like we're here to ultimately serve the consumer, even though we work with other businesses. Our goal is to have the consumer win. That's really where I see us going, is really, one, learning the technology, and right now just building little hooks into Web3. I do not see us taking our brands completely into Web3 in the next couple of years, but I do think that the levers and the mechanics for us to do that should be built, and we're looking at it. So now as we're talking about new apps with our brands, we're always thinking about the blockchain, and we're always thinking about Web3. Let's make sure that we're building product for the future.
And I've got two questions. I want to ask you the escape your limits question, but just one more that I've kind of forgot to ask you, but as business owners, and you've answered it a little bit, but where could we go to, where do you go to find out what's happening in this world? Because I always used to think that I'm fairly up on trends, and I've spent 5 years interviewing people. I've never interviewed anybody about this, and I kind of feel a little bit sort of ashamed that I'm sort of so out of touch with something that's so obvious. But my guess is there's a lot of people in that position. So where would you say people could go, and are there any podcasts, are there any books, magazines that people could start to read just to sort of get a little bit familiar with some of these things that are going on?
Yeah, there's several out there. I mean, there's several podcasts on the Web3 today that I listen to. There's a lot of books. One of the things I would suggest you do is go back and read Satoshi's paper in 2009. That should be the first thing you read. It's only 9 pages long.
Really?
And
okay. Where do you find out?
You can just Google it.
Right.
Just Google Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer cash system. And that's what kicked off this entire movement. And it's written in simple English and plain English. It kind of shows you the mechanics of how we thought about crypto and the underlying technology, which we call blockchain today. So that's the first place I would go. And then after that, there's a ton of available resources online. If you just search for it, you'll find one that is particular for your industry.
Okay, all right, cool. So last question then, Mo. Escape your limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make possible. What would be a memorable example of escaping your own limits?
Well, I mean, I came from a Fortune 500 company, but with an electronics background.
What was that?
Sharp Electronics. I spent almost 10 years, a full decade at Sharp. But health and fitness, and anyone that's known me from then has always been a passion for me. And I finally decided to say, I want to do something in health and wellness. And in 2012, I started this company without knowing nobody. I did not know a single brand, a single person, literally no contacts. But I followed my passion. I believed that I can have an impact in the industry. And I took the chance. I don't even want to call that a risk because I believe that I can make an impact.
Well, I definitely see you doing that, and we've not known each other for very long, but we've created a great friendship, and I'm really excited to see what you guys are doing in the future. So keep up the good work, mate.
I appreciate it, Matthew, and this has been an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.